wild, honestly, about how misunderstood that I have been about this whole thing. However, I've
It appears my last video on the 62 men versus visitors debate has gone right over the heads of the people who needed to hear it, so let me spell it out for you. I have no problem with people correcting facts or figures. In fact, I said I probably would have corrected the same one had I come across it. I actually do fact check stuff like this all the time. I even pointed out my little sign to you. But when I fact check, I make sure that it does not function as a distraction from whatever the real problem is. I work really hard to center the issue at hand and to check the facts in support of the truth. So when I fact check things like what ICE can and can't do, what they are doing, who they're targeting, how, etc., I make sure that I am not denying nor minimizing the very real threat there. All of a sudden, it's somehow a dunk that actually it's not millions of women, it's only hundreds of thousands of them, or it's only tens of thousands, it's only thousands, it's only a few hundred. But actually, if that's the point you're making, then you're already wrong, because the maximum acceptable number is actually 0. So unless you're talking about...
The thing that I take issue with here is just I don't and have never disagreed with the point you're making at all. I've conceded this point 1,000 fucking times at this point. I've said it a million times at this point, even as somebody that came forward with the criticism that most of the users of said website were probably not there for this content particularly. That was me. But the truth of the matter is that if even one person was looking for it, it's obviously too many.
Numbers as part of a larger...
We're having a completely, a misunderstanding as well that's going in both directions, really, because, if I fact check at all, it's presumed that, I don't already share this point of view and everything, but just because every comment I make on the matter doesn't specifically talk about the fact that if even one person visits, it's too many, doesn't mean that I've ever disagreed. It's rather assumptive on people's part that if I make a point about the fact that the site hosts a broad diversity of content, about this website and everything, that the site has a million different videos that cater to a broad diversity of sexualized interest, and most of the people who went to it were probably not going to the rape videos particularly and specifically. But the truth of the matter is that if I even say that, then you're going to act like I distracted from the issue at hand. And the thing is that I already agree with you. I just don't think that every fucking time I comment on the fucking thing, I should have to remind people that I think that, if you were involved in looking for this type of content at all, that you're a problem.
Or conversation, the focus and framing of which is this behavior is wrong, and let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, this behavior is wrong, and I have no issue talking about that in particular, but again, I guess when I see a figure as large as 62 million, I'm afraid at this point. These kinds of stats freak me out, okay? Because when I see something that is that massive, I'm like, we've just handed, a group of people who have look, there's an undercurrent within feminism that really loves to hate on men, and we've just given them something. So, trying to make the understanding of the numbers smaller is, definitely something that's of interest to me in particular, because it wasn't a huge group of men, not in the millions, that were responsible for this. It was a tiny group of criminals who are grafting themselves on the mother list is, their website to spread links in the comment section out to their Telegram channels and everything. They're abusing the site. In fact, I would argue that the site in particular has been victimized by a group of criminals. But that stated, this is horrible, and I think they in particular, they've fucked up because they haven't done enough to, remove this content, to take it down. It's a valid criticism of motherless.com itself that enforcement has been entirely too lax. that they're not doing enough to crack down on these criminals and everything is readily apparent from what the CNN story reported. Like, yeah, even one person engaging in this is too many.
I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And in fact, this situation is exactly why I push so hard to ensure people get every little detail right. Because if, God forbid, they don't, someone acting in bad faith will latch onto whatever detail it is that they got wrong and use it to...
Yeah, but in this case, this person that I'm not acting in bad faith. I'm just not, like I don't think the numbers are that high, and because of the fact that I think what happened here is terrible. I think the people who did it are awful. I think they belong in prison. I think the worst of anybody involved, and I welcome discussion about any of that. However, with the times that we live in, and in the culture and the context of the time, I think that it is unfortunate that there is such, a rush to hate on men, and it is that train that I've wanted to derail because it wasn't a huge group of us. It was a tiny minority, a small group of miscreants that belong in prison that is probably, in the hundreds of thousands instead of the millions.
To invalidate the entire point. So now we have a bunch of men, because in this case it is men, running around in comment sections arguing the exact same points, quibbling over how many people exactly are watching these types of videos on this specific site. And you know what I haven't seen a single one of them do? Condemn the fact that men were doing this to women in the first place.
Jesus Christ. Just because, I'm not condemning it in every fucking comment I make on the fucking topic does not mean that I'm okay with any of it. I don't know why I have to constantly remind anybody in order to fact check anything that I object to this, that the fact that there were men watching this, men doing this, and engaging in this. You know what I was thinking primarily as I was reading the story myself and going through the CNN story? To me, it was like, this makes the case for bringing back human sacrifice. The Mayans had the right of it. We need to find the men that were engaging in this and sacrifice them, especially to appease the goddess of feminine rage, because women are pissed. And with good reason. They've just been handed a great reason to be pissed off. I'm not mad about that. You see, I'm just concerned that, they're going to make, it out like it's a much bigger problem than it actually is.
Condemn the fact that men are filming it and then posting it in the first place. Condemn
Which is
the fact
fucked
that there are
up.
people seeking out this content and watching
Fucked
it in the
up.
first place. I haven't seen them condemn, let alone...
Like, what makes you think that I'm okay with any of this just because I'm not condemning it in every single comment I make about it?
Alone acknowledge any other detail in that article. And that's notable because this...
That article made me feel fucking sick. It was horrible. I mean, but, the other reaction that I'm having with a lot of it is just, I guess another type of feeling that it made me feel is a desire to divorce myself from, responsibility for the behavior and the misconduct of other men. The guys that were involved in this, we don't talk, we don't chat. I've never communicated with any of them. They're fucking pieces of shit. They belong behind bars, and I hope they get every single fucking one of these cockroaches.
Website is just one piece of a larger puzzle. Yes, misinformation is wrong, even if it supposedly helps your side. But I always argue, I don't think it helps your side. I think it can only ever harm it. But that nugget of misinformation, wrong as it is, doesn't make the people latching onto it and using it to invalidate the entire problem any...
As far as I'm concerned, I was not attempting to use the fact that there was a bit of misinformation to invalidate the entire problem. I was simply trying to correct the estimation of the number of people who were contributing to the problem smaller.
Less wrong. And by the way, the latest correction/defense for this website, which I wasn't aware of by the time I made my first one, is that it's a site that hosts a variety of mature content. Therefore, the number of visitors doesn't reflect the total number of viewers of this specific type of content. And fair enough. But if it's about the numbers, the fact remains that there are at least 20,000
it was me who made that point, Breana.
Videos of this type that we know of on that website, and they have tens of thousands,
which is fucked up. Like, two things stand out to me about this. Motherless.com has done a terrible job, absolutely abhorrent job of enforcing its own policies. Even the tagline of the site nowadays is that, this is the part of the web where anything legal stays up forever. Well, this content isn't legal. And the fact of the matter is the fact that this illegal content, this is the subsection of the law, right, that I myself am the most concerned about, because I don't have I don't have as much of a problem with other types of crime other than like rape and murder. These are the two big, terrible things that human beings do to each other, the two biggest. And the fact of the matter is that anybody that was doing this, like, that is absolutely sick and vile. And Motherless.com has done a terrible job because this has happened under their watch. Like, they are responsible ultimately for moderating their website. And the fact of the matter is that they have done such a lax job of enforcement that criminals have slipped in under the net in order to engage in this kind of shit. But, I don't know why so many people didn't even take, the effort to go to the goddamn website itself and see it before they started, engaging in this kind of criticism of things. Because if they had seen the site itself, they would have known already that, the site is like, most of the content on it has nothing to do with the abuse that happened. And you're lumping a huge statistic, like the quotes came on, there were like 80 million visitors in March, right? But most of the people that came to that website were probably not steering to this content specifically that stated. The fact that anybody is a problem, and even one is too many. Like, but see, the split that I have with this is that, if I say that at this point, it almost feels like I have to acknowledge that every time, I make a correction of anything. And the fact of the matter is that I'm pretty disgusted by the fact that anybody was involved in this at all, I just don't see why I should have to, like, repeat that aspect of it over and over and over and over again. I'm already saying it.
Views. It is still a fact that in the comments, in the message boards that are all found through this site, there are men giving each other advice on how to do this to their partners.
Oh man, Jesus, I rarely read the comments on those sites because why would you?
There are men advertising substances you can use against your partner.
Which is fucked, I can't believe that they have allowed this shit to go on their infrastructure. I think that we as men should start boycotting the site because of this to pressure them. In this case, this is sick.
There are links and ads to websites where you can watch this happening live.
Sick.
And these people who are defending this website specifically based on the numbers would know that if they actually cared about the issue at hand and read the article. They're also acting, by the way, as though this is the only...
I read the article, though. I didn't actually know that, from the article that they were, linking to other websites to host the videos, because... the assumption that I made from the article was that they were using Motherless.com to host the videos, which, yeah.
Website of its kind. And it wasn't just last year that someone discovered several group chats with up to 70,000 members in them for this exact type of purpose.
Well, that 70,000 figure is, I think, probably more realistic of the scope of the actual problem. And yeah, it's terrible. And the fact that anybody was doing this is vile and absolutely terrible, and these criminals need to be brought to justice. But, again, 70,000 is a massive, wide wide difference between, it being 62 million or 80 million abusers.
It's actually not just a couple hundred or 1,000 men at most, like the so-called fact checkers keep claiming. It's a lot more than that. But no, they have successfully distracted from the point, or at least they think they have. I have some people arguing, well, there's this type of content on TikTok, and there's that type of content on this other website. And that may be true, and that is a problem. See how easy that is? See?
I've made exactly that argument already. The fact that you didn't see it doesn't mean that I didn't say it, ever.
How easy that is? You're never going to catch us defending those sites by pretending that the problem isn't the problem. You are fact-checking as a way to obfuscate the point.
I'm not actually interested in obfuscating the point. I think the people that were involved in this belong in prison. I was horrified and disgusted reading the same story, like it, but it made me want to disentangle myself and disown men at large, because I can't control them. I can't stop them from doing this. I can't make them realize how fucked up what they're doing is, make them stop, doing it. And I think the odious pieces of unfuckable filth and shit who did this are not the type of people that I am capable of reaching. They are too far gone.
That means to hide or make it harder to see. How hard is it to say, hey, technically it's 62 million visitors to a site that has other types of content, so they're probably not all there for that specific type of content, but I see your point. And even one visitor looking for this content and finding it is a problem.
Breana, that was my point the entire fucking time.
But by the way, I'm also...
That was my point the entire fucking time. I wasn't, by saying what I said, I wasn't trying to say, I don't see your point. I was just trying to say, hey, look, these figures are too, there's a huge difference between it being, 62 million of us and 70,000, okay? The number of abusers is not as large as it's being made out to be. However, the fact that any of them exist, these people belong in prison.
Told that website also hosts a bunch of revenge content, and that's not even part of the numbers that we're talking about.
Well, Breana, I didn't know that in particular about the website because, I'm just somebody who's used it occasionally to watch porn. That's about the extent to my knowledge of the site. So, did I go in and delve in it deeply enough to find the revenge porn of it? No. I would have been horrified by that, too.
About now. So let's also not act like there aren't probably a lot more visitors to this site that are still a problem. And by the way, it also seems that you're not quite understanding part of the problem, which is that this is normalized enough to be just another page on this website. I have no problem with sites of this nature existing, mind you. And you know what? I'm going to do you one even better. Even for those who enjoy this being performed for them with explicit consent. Apparently, none of those came across the messages trading tips on how to do it for real.
Why would you be looking at the comment section if you're just there to get off, is a question that I'm left to ask.
And thought to report those either. And you, instead of being outraged by this, you're running interference. And this is where the crux of it lies, where it gets so nuanced. And it's not even that nuanced, to be honest, but this is where the people who need to hear this the most will turn off their brain. I always want to encourage people to call out misinformation and correct misinformation. However, if this specifically is your first time fighting misinformation, then perhaps it is not the misinformation you care about. And it's the fact that so many conscripts...
Let me explain that one to my viewership. Alright, this is one topic that I might be more qualified than average to speak on because of the fact that I have visited said website, although, to be totally formally honest about this one, I don't read comments on porn sites. It doesn't seem to be like a conversation I'm interested in having with other users on these sites. I have heard, that it tends to be one of the most like least toxic corners of the web because people tend to be more cordial and friendly with each other on them. But I just go not not why I'm there at all. And plus I find that I'm afraid to see what other people are saying on them because the men when yeah when their head is in the gutter can often say some of the worst, most terrible shit. So I don't want to see it, and everything because like I'm just there to get off. I'm not there to read everybody's toxic thoughts and critiques of what the woman looks like and all the terrible things that they can say about women in these situations. Like I don't want to see it. I just want to do my business and get out of there.
To this battle against misinformation, don't even deem it worthy of mentioning what the very, very serious problem actually is that makes me doubt their motivation. And if you are someone who has spent more time condemning the misuse or miscitation of that figure than you have spent condemning the original behavior and story that brought this about in the first place, I think we know what you're really about.
And I think that you're underestimating the reality that it takes far more energy and effort to debunk bullshit and disinformation than it does to actually spread it. The fact of the matter is that we have to spend more time discrediting misinformation because of the fact that it is a lot easier to spread bullshit than it is to debunk it. The web, as it stands, is now completely plastered at this point in wild, wild misunderstandings of the story at hand. The CNN story, in particular, like it really is rather stunning to me that we have a whole web of people that have been using it for the longest time and yet completely failed to grasp the fundamentals of like the real chain of events that actually happened in the story. See, to me, my best understanding of that story is like the chain of events happened in this manner. You know, these users went to motherless.com. They went into the comment section of the site. They used it to advertise services to each other. They used it to direct each other to their creepy Telegram channels and everything. They pushed each other off of the website and into their own little corners of the web where they engaged in this creepy content. But these criminals are using motherless.com's infrastructure to facilitate their crimes. The majority of the users of this site were also victimized by this behavior, because now, there's a giant stat that's floating out around there as if 62 million people that were just porn consumers were, engaged in this shit. So yeah, no, I mean, the fact that 70,000 were involved, throw them all behind bars. I don't give a shit, And if you want to talk about that, if you want to talk about the abuse of the men involved, go ahead. Like I'm happy to host that conversation, but the fact is that it wasn't 62 fucking million. And the reason why I would debunk, this kind of information and go after this is because this is one that I might actually know something about. Why would you weigh in to debunk misinformation if you didn't feel qualified to do it,